filling in. So, for the first piece, what we did is we basically looked at issues. What are the issues that arise as you interpret? Now, my students always accuse me of making things more complex always, and it's so. But now what we're going to do is we're going to move to point B, that's on the second page, how to proceed. So what do we do now? Now we're getting beyond looking at the issues. What do we do? And we're going to have, if you're looking at this page, we have two major points, semantics and pragmatics. And the top part, semantics has to do with meaning, pragmatics has to do with effect. All right? So it's, oh, thank you. Yes. So we're dealing with meaning here, which we'll be doing for a few weeks. And fundamental categories of interpretation. And I want to take the top three, I'll put these up. Largest little stuff here. Fundamental categories of interpretation. Words, better term is signifiers. Meaning, which is conceptual signifieds, and I'll talk about that. And then referent. Now, instead of taking each one of these and going in depth, first, I'm going to talk about each of these just very briefly so that you get the categories, and then we'll start in on each one. So the first is words or signifiers. Now, this is what is conveying meaning. We have to be careful not to be sloppy here. So, when you look at marks on a page, that is something that signifies meaning to you. This is, you might say that the words, more accurately or broadly, signifiers, are the physical means by which something is communicated. So it's the actual stuff here in black and white on the page. All right? Now, you may or may not be able to interpret that. If I would give you Chinese or Russian, you probably wouldn't. Or something, you know, I saw something on the TV the other day when there was this attack on Syria, and then they were showing some stuff on Arab TV, and they had the Arabic running, and it's running in the reverse direction because they do it the way Hebrew does. See, and so you have a bunch of signifiers on the screen, but you can't interpret them. This is the most basic thing. Now, I'm using the word signifiers and not words because there are other things, and this is, we're going to be coming to this, there are other things that signify meaning besides words. For example, look at that guy sitting over there with the clerical collar on. Now, you know that he is the kind of guy who is or can function liturgically, okay, as opposed to someone who looks like, let us say, Andre. All right, so I want to be able to expand on this. Now, meaning. Meaning is what's in your head. It's not out there anywhere. It's what's in your head. This is why it is a conceptual signifier. It is, I like this term. This is a term I usually use in teaching. It is what is evoked, that arises in your mind when you encounter a signifier. It's all in your mind. So if I say unicorn, and you then have an image of a unicorn in your mind, okay, the signifier was actually the sound coming at you, and it evoked something for you. You cannot, this sounds funny to say it this way, but it's worth saying it. You cannot see, touch, or feel a conceptual signifier, but you can a signifier or a word. Okay? They surely do. My mother, for 10 years, did brailing for people who were unsighted. And, that's a perfect example of being able to feel the signifier. Okay? Now, you remember I fooled with this next thing a while back, but I want to put this up again. And one of the reasons I like to go through this kind of Voelzian gobbledygook mumbo-jumbo of terms like this is because the problem is that the word can mean either one of those in normal English parlance. Now remember, I put this up on the board. So if you say, here, like this, Jim saw John. All right? Now there's the sentence. Now if I ask you, what's the first word in the sentence? The answer is Jim. If I now ask you, what's the relationship to the first two words, between the first two words, you're going to say something like subject and verbal action or something like that. You're not going to say this, 3 inches. See, now that would be the relationship of the words as signifiers. So if I said, what is the relationship of the word as signifiers, you'd say something like, one is standing to the left of the other, or something like that, or 3 inches apart. But you know that when I say, what's the relationship between the first two words, you know I mean the meanings evoked by the first two words. And it is that difficulty that you have to kind of smoke out pedagogically so that people aren't confused about what you're saying. Now, I'm just going to stop right here and say, this is the difficulty with an issue like verbal inspiration. Well, what are you talking about with the word verba? Verbum is the singular in Latin. All right? Are you talking about the marks on the page? Or are you talking about the conceptual signifiers? Or are you talking about them both? Or does it slide around? See, you have to have, when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, I like to put it like this, you got to have enough weaponry here to deal with the topics. If we just use word, we're going to get ourselves in trouble. Okay? So I'm going to take this away. Let's humor me here. So let's go with signifiers and conceptual signifiers. Now what about referent? Referent is what I'm talking about, not what I'm saying about it. So let's say that you have at the table, we're having a conference or something, and there are 4 pastors sitting. And I say, go over and talk to my pastor. Now, everybody knows the meaning of my, everybody knows the meaning of pastor. words, my pastor till the cows come home. But you don't know which of those four guys I'm talking about. That's a referent problem. See, so referent is who you're talking, or what you're talking about. The conceptual signified will be ideas of what you're saying about that person or thing. Now, I thought of this in the pastor's sermon today. My wife thought I was writing something else, but I said no, I was writing something for the Bible class. And it's this. He quoted when he was talking, Pastor Punky, when he was talking about the work of our Lord, and he said this. He was talking about, what was our understanding of what happened at the cross? That was the introduction, and then he went on and talked about the meaning of the resurrection. But he said this. We know from some passages what happened at the cross. And he quoted Isaiah 53. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. I don't know that there's any dispute about the meaning of those. Who's he? Who's him? You think it's obvious, the Jews don't. See, so it is not that we don't know the meaning of he or him, which is the accusative form of the personal pronoun he. It's that the referent is not terribly distinct, given the context in Isaiah. We think it is, the Jews don't. For the Jews, they think that him is either Isaiah or the people of Israel personified as the servant. Now you see, that's not a signifier or conceptual signified issue at all. It is purely a referent issue. Now you get this in the New Testament with Jesus using Son of Man. Alright? So, the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins on earth. You will see the Son of Man coming in power and great glory. Who's he talking about? Now, I think it's clear when you're doing the Gospel Mark that Jesus is the Son of Man and uses it as what I call in my commentary his preferred self-designation. I'm not so sure that everybody knew that, though, when he was talking. So, there's a way in which he sort of concealed who the referent was by using that kind of phraseology because, now believe it or not, in all the Old Testament, there is no place in which the phrase, the Son of Man, is ever used. Oh, there are some references to Son of Man, or one like a Son of Man. But Jesus has the genius of putting the definite article. The Son of Man. There was no precedent for that entity. Thus proves the Jim Belt's theory that if Jesus wasn't God, he should have been. Because there are all of these incredible things that he does. But this is why it sort of went by people at times. Because Jesus using the Son of Man is a new thing. And so the referent isn't terribly clear.
It seems as though it went by the disciples in the beginning.
It went by the disciples in the beginning. That's exactly right. Now, people sort of had clues about it and so on, but it wasn't always so terribly obvious. But the way he, kind of works with it, you get this after a while. But, I'm telling you, see, this is a really astute question here. Because scholars will actually argue, I think this is silly if you're reading it, but they'll actually argue when Jesus says, you will see the Son of Man coming in power and great glory. Who's he talking about? Well, look, the whole while he's been using it about himself. Who do you think he's talking about? But to be fair, he never says, I am the Son of Man. See, and that's your point. He never says it like that. You have to believe his words, which is always
You get that for the rest of the life. In time, as Jesus speaks more and more, basically.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, now, let me illustrate a little bit about this business of referent here. Now, who am I going to pick here? Jim, I'll pick you. Now, when I start writing on the, don't show this here. When I start writing on the blackboard, I want you to say out kind of boldly what's on the other side of this paper, okay? Yeah, when I'm up. Okay, go ahead.
He's got a gun.
Okay. He's got a gun. Now, when you say that, those sound waves are the signifier. The conceptual signifier arising in my mind is that a male person in this audience has a weapon that fires bullets. Okay, now, when I turn around and look, I have a referent problem. See? I know what the word he means. I don't know which one of you it is. That's the referent. So, and then he's got a gun. I have a set of characteristics in my mind as to what this gun's characteristics are. I'd be thinking of a pistol, whether automatic or revolver. But when I turn, so I've got this conceptual signifier, I turn and I suddenly see Andre has an AR-15. Okay, now I have a wrong conceptual signified here, but it's sort of close enough for government work, you know. So I will recognize that weapon as a gun, even though all the characteristics aren't the same. So when you yell this up, he's got a gun. I have both a referent and a conceptual signified issue when I turn around. Now, if you know, to be honest with you, this is why you have no idea how greatly and wonderfully made we are by God. That we process all this stuff and we know, you know, what we have to look for and what we should be thinking and so on. Hey, I've said to many people, and Mike gets mad when I say this, but you know, Luther is not right when he says that music is God's second greatest gift to mankind after Jesus. The answer is language is. Languages. It's the most unbelievable thing. It's got so many facets to it, and then you do it in so many ways. You do it this way, you do it this way, you do it with articles. Latin has no articles. Greek only has definite articles. We have definite and indefinite articles, but the Romans conquered the world without any definite articles. And so you can do it. Right.
What happens, as we see today, that our language is separated from all three of those? In other words, people who view language as plastic, as evolving, as changing. For example, just with what we struggle with pronouns now.
Yeah.
So when you undermine those three things, that the words and signifiers and reference no longer have a constant meaning to them.
Yeah, well, and see, then you get all kinds of issues with this. Now, there was one, I was, where was that thing about history that I was talking about? Yeah, well, I I just saw something recently. What was this? Was
Well, let me
something on the
give you an
ship?
example.
Well, no, here, I got it. You're going to like this. They were talking about this. Not history, but her story. Now, you know, I said, this is really an interesting concept because if you think that that's his, I'm here to tell you that it comes from the Greek word historia, and the Greek word for his is autou. It's not anything like this at all, you know. But so there, and I can talk about this later, there you have almost a sort of a magical view of signifiers or something like that. You're taking them apart and putting them together in odd ways. You're fooling with the signifier, see?
But you're separating the signifier from the conceptual
Yeah.
signifier. And so once you made that jump, once you no longer have those two connected, what do you have? You have language that evolves. And my example I want to give you was this binary person who now calls itself they. That's the preferred definition of how do you know, if you identify yourself as binary, I'm supposed to call you they. I'm not supposed to call you he or she. I'm supposed to call you they. So then what do you do with the language? They is sitting next to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see, you separated the whole signifier from the conceptual signifier from the referent. And then your language becomes that.
Yeah.
Which is where we are.
Yeah, conceptual signify. Now, presumably we're going to be going on with this class, and we will talk, I'm not kidding you about this, we will talk about subnuclear physics and the two-slit experiment, all right? When we talk about quantum, we will be talking about what I believe is the basis for all of this. You will really like this, but you're moving to Michigan. Now, you may want to reconsider.
I'm afraid there's more into the decision than this.
Yes, I know. But there are big issues here, and it's not just people being silly. This is the problem, right?
This is what our grandchildren are inheriting. A language that no longer is connected.
Yeah. No, I agree
I
with
got an answer for that. I ain't changing my grammar for nobody.
Yes, and keep it up. That great work. Okay, so now what we're going to do now is we've got the three categories. So we're going to focus on each one of these now. So let's do words or signifiers, which is, when we're interpreting the Bible, which is text criticism. So now, what we're going to have to do, this is the most absolute, basic level of considering a text. So for the New Testament, the Greek text, and at the very bottom you'll see these smaller parts here. These are the variant readings in some of the manuscripts. Okay? So, now just understand, I said this at the beginning, just understand, there are about 5,000 manuscripts of the Greek New Testament. Just realize that for an average Plato dialogue, we maybe have 6. Okay? So, we have, with some of the great things of the classics, we have only one. It's unbelievable what we have from the New Testament. And most of the manuscripts are hundreds and hundreds of years after the production. We have that snippet from John from about 125. Now, what we've got to do is figure out what marks on the page we're going to read. That's your first and most basic procedure. Remember, this thing didn't drop out of the sky. All right? The Bible did not drop out of the sky. one of the things that we did on our tour is we stopped in Mainz and we had a tour of the Gutenberg Museum. Now this was really interesting. We've been there a couple of times and it's great every time you go. You've been there, right? You've been, haven't you been to Mainz? One of the seats of the lectures? Gosh, all right. You think you can run a business without going to Mainz? All right. But at any rate, you know, the guy was showing this, and he produced the page and so on like that. And I made a comment to the guy there. I said, what's interesting is that in the earliest production of Gutenberg in the printing press, now we're talking about the middle of the 1400s, so like 1455, okay, for a date. I'll put that. They made the print of the printing press as much like the letters of hand manuscripts as they could. So interestingly enough, the first books were intended to look like manuscripts. As a matter of fact, and I did not know this point until this particular demonstration, all that Gutenberg printed was the black. They had professional hand guys, artists, who would put in, like the manuscripts used to have, the fancy first letter in color and so on like that. So the pages, they showed this was really interesting. The pages come off very bare in black and white with big blanks. And in these blanks, then the artist would put in the opening letter or some flourish, you know, at the end of a book or something like that. But the guy showed us, how is it that you can tell that it is printed and not a manuscript? Here's the answer. The lines are justified. Okay? So when you get to the right, it doesn't end at various places, it ends like that. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is really an important point for me to make, there was a huge leap that happened when writing was invented. Okay, because now you can preserve things, and it's not just the sound goes. But it was an equally important leap when printing was invented, because now you could have identical copies, and you could never have that before. I mean, you realize there are about 6,000 manuscripts. No two are exactly alike. No two are exactly alike. When you have the printing press, they now have the possibility of producing stuff that is exactly alike. Now, Rick, what's real interesting about this is, now listen to how I'm going to say this. The rise of the historical critical method and about critical work on the text of the Bible is only possible after the rise of printing. And that's because of two reasons. Number one, everybody can work with the same text because you have exact copies. And you can now, see, now is the time when stuff like the synoptic problem really arises. You can easily now compare things because you've got clean copies that are easily, they're settled, and they are easily comparable. which you couldn't do before. So a guy named Tom Boomershine, who's over in Ohio, not far from here, has this theory that at each, now listen to how this goes, at each new jump of communication technology, you have a new hermeneutical move. You have a new interpretive principle coming. So, he says, when things went from oral to writing, that occasioned the arising of allegory. Because now you could actually look at the text, at the signifiers, and think about them, and compare text, worry about structure. I mean, you realize, see, we're dealing with the whole world, just the world of signifiers here. That's all we're dealing with. I mean, do you realize that this word is proper only for writing? There is no structure to an oral presentation. That's an imposition of a written document back on an oral presentation. There is a flow of thought and so on, but people do not analyze structure of something that is solely oral unless you are retrojecting notions of writing back onto that. You know, how would that, like for example, you give a lecture and I take notes. Well, now I got those notes down there and now I can start talking about structure. Okay? So, once we have writing, now people start to go back and think about things and think about the application of the story, and now all of a sudden allegory starts to arise. How are you going to apply these Homeric hymns or whatever to the modern day? Now, I've already tipped my hand here. When we go to printing, we have the arisal of the historical critical hymn. So now comes the really critical working on the text of the Bible, where people are starting to say stuff like this. Oh, look, the word for God in the Old Testament is Elohim, and for Lord is Yahweh. Well, some of the verses have Elohim, some of the verses have Yahweh. Now, if we take a look at this on the page, we could take out all the ones that say Elohim and make that a separate source, and we take out all the ones that say Yahweh. Well, you can't do that orally, and you can't even do it. It's not convenient to do it with manuscripts. See, you got to have that settled business of the printed page. So you basically, let me just put this up here. So essentially, writing gives rise to allegory as a possibility. I mean, it doesn't mean everybody allegorizes, but it gives rise to the possibility. And printing gives rise to historical criticism. Now comes the interesting issue. Now you notice, please, I'm going to keep saying it, we're only dealing with signifiers here. That how are you actually transmitting what you're transmitting? Well, Pat, see? Now, the Jews argue if you have an electronic version of the Pentateuch, is it sacrilegious to delete the name of God? See, now you're not doing it on the page, you're just kind of moving the cursor or something. Well, so now stuff is plastic. Okay? We're not sure where we are on this yet, because it's really only impacted, I mean, you have to figure, the old medium always exerts an influence even when the new medium comes, okay? You know, thus, for example, it's still true that people would allegorize and so on after printing comes and so forth. And with this business of, Marshall McLuhan talked about the medium as the message. Well, what was interesting and ironic about Marshall McLuhan is he spread his ideas in a book, and here he's supposed to be talking about electronics. So, and I can tell you this absolutely. There is no scholar alive who wants to have his latest work published only electronic. You want to have a book. Okay? So there is always the whole of the old medium. Now, Pat, you brought this up, and we've got to figure, what it is, how this is going to impact. But what's always important is for people to be aware that media questions, I gotta say this right, media questions have hermeneutical significance. See, it's not just that you're doing the same thing in another medium. All of a sudden, different possibilities arise and so forth. Okay, now, for the Bible, as we confront it, there is no, let's just stick to the New Testament for a second. There is no complete, single, edited edition of the New Testament until the Novum Instrumentum of Erasmus, which we talked about in 1560. Otherwise, all you have are manuscripts. So you have to make decisions. Now, lots of the decisions are, what would you say, fatuous, whether or not you spell Ioannes, John, with one N or two. I mean, there'll be those kinds of things. But then there are other ones where all of a sudden the word Christ isn't there. See? So there are other decisions that you have to make. Now, when we confront these hundreds and thousands of manuscripts, so remember, I think I maybe said this earlier, we've got about 130 on papyrus. Okay, we've got about 300 on vellum with capital letters called maiuscules, capital letters. And then we've got about 5,000 minuscules, which are on vellum, but these are written in small Greek. So in other words, these are written, the delta looks like this, and this one, the delta looks like that. So, and that change took place 8th to 9th century AD. So we've got all these. How do you choose? All right. You're going to be surprised when I tell you how you do it. Number one, you don't make your decision by the number of manuscripts that attest a given reading. You don't do it, believe it or not, by the age of the manuscript. You don't do it by the type of material, papyrus or vellum. You don't make your decision by the manner of writing, capitals or minuscules. You make your decision on the basis of what copyists were likely to do as they transmitted the text. I'm going to say this again. You make your decision on the basis of what's usually called transcriptional probability. So, let's take a look. Take your Bibles. Let's take a look. And let's take a look at this text, Matthew 24:36. Okay? Now, who's got a King James here? Oh, wait a minute, I didn't hand off my papers.
I have a New King James.
Nah, that's not going to count. Because they'll fool with this, I think. Here you go, Jim. Matthew 24:36. Now, you do have a New King James? Well, we'll see after Jim Proust gets stuff. Now, I want you to follow along with me. I'm translating from the Greek. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows. Okay, now, how does Jesus go on? Jim?
The verses aren't marked here, but I think this is, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son nor the Father. Well, that's Philip.
No, that's Philip, right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not used to this.
Right.
Parallel. Okay, you want verse 36?
36.
But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only.
Whoa! The angels in heaven, but my Father only. What does New King James have?
No, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only.
Okay, so it does do that. Well, what do you have? Nor the Son. Okay, so we have a bunch of manuscripts. In fact, the vast majority of manuscripts omit the reference to the Son. Okay? Other manuscripts, in particular, Manuscript B, Vaticanus in the Vatican. And then Aleph, which is Sinaiticus, that's that one that was found in Sinai, the corrector of it, plus Manuscript D and others, add nor the Son. Now this is a signal case. In general, copyists tended to eliminate problems. Okay? It's a problem saying the Son doesn't know the time of the end. And some manuscripts keep in the difficulty. Other manuscripts take out the difficulty. Okay? Now, let's go to Luke 11:4. We looked at this one briefly, but now it's going to make more sense. Well, actually, we can do 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, and 4. Of Luke 11. Yes, Ed, we're in the New Testament.
Since my fingers don't move.
All right, King James. All right, now, let's just do the ESV first. Okay, Judy, you want to read that? That should be it.
And he said to them, when you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone who is indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation.
Okay, now, Jim, read the King James.
And he said unto them, when ye pray, say, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, as in heaven, so in earth. Give us day by day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone that is indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Where's all that from? Well, it's from Matthew. See? It's from Matthew 6. All right? So, a whole bunch of manuscripts have evened out the two versions of the Lord's Prayer and made the shorter one sound like the longer one. Okay? Well, which manuscripts have added all that extra stuff in? The same ones that omitted the Son in the previous passage. And which ones leave all that out and makes Luke's version of the Lord's Prayer different? The ones that I have put up here, we have B and L, and not this time, not D. B and L, and one of the old papyri P75, and so forth. So, here's what you find. Some manuscripts do the hard thing on a consistent basis. They don't make parallels even. They keep them, juxtaposed against each other. They don't drop out difficult things, they keep them in. Or they don't add simple things, or things that smooth things out, they leave them out. This is what we mean. This is really important. I mean, what I've said here about the last 10 minutes is super important for you to get. So, when we talk about better manuscripts, we don't mean oldest manuscripts. Manuscripts with the widest dispersal of area that they were from. Manuscripts written on papyrus. Manuscripts written with minuscule capitals. We don't mean any of that stuff. What we mean is the copyist who did the manuscript did the right thing in not, what shall I say, homogenizing and smoothing out the text.
But you're altering it, right?
Yeah, that's right. The guy who's not altering the text. Just a second. I'm going to get to you. Now, what's interesting about this theory is, you may be surprised about this, Bryce, But the videotapes from the first several centuries are no longer in existence. They've been. We don't actually have any videotapes about how the scribes operate. All of this is kind of by analogy from the way we know copying works. And there are all kinds of principles of this. For example, a guy's eye, and you've seen this already when you type letters or something, your eye will skip and you'll go from one mention of, like say, if you're doing something for the Red Cross, you might have a paragraph and you have the word emergency, and a few lines later emergency, and all of a sudden, if you're copying it, it jumps to the second line, all right? That's called haplography, where you cut the thing in half by doing this. So basically, text critics have developed all kinds of principles of what happens to copyists as they try to copy. They drop out stuff by accident if things are alike. They tend to put in natural complements. Here's a natural compliment. Scribes and Pharisees. So you'll get this every once in a while. Jesus said to the scribes, well, then other manuscripts will have scribes and Pharisees. Why? Well, they kind of go together, you know, and without thinking, you just sort of put it in. So there are all kinds of principles with copyists, but it has to be admitted that we are kind of operating on our supposition of how copying works, and that the same mistakes people make today were the kind of mistakes people made back centuries ago. You have to admit that. But this is the way it works. And now I'm going to give you this term here. This is great for cocktail parties. Use this. This is what you're looking for now. The so-called lectio difficilio, the more difficult reading. Lectio, you can see lection. Difficilio, you can see difficult. See? The more difficult reading is the reading that you look for. What's interesting about this is just the opposite of the way most people would think it would go. Most people would think you look for the one that smooths out problems and that. But that's exactly what the scribes tended to do. So you look for the more difficult reading, and sometimes, there's a better version of this. I'll put this in a different color. I actually prefer this version of the rule. The reading that explains the rise of the other readings. Now, Bruce Metzger, who was a great text critic in the 20th century, died maybe about 5 years ago, and used this example in one of his books, that there is a line in Milton about someone not being able to open a lock, which he had to turn the key damnably hard. And he said there are some versions of this word that have the word desperately hard. He said, now if you think about this, people, you can understand why somebody would change damnably to desperately, but it's hard to believe that it done it the other way. So you take out the swear word and put in something easier. So you would say, this is a reading that explains the rise of the other readings in copyist terms. Okay, in copyist terms. Now, go ahead with your question.
Well, way back there. My question was, what is the reference for we? You said we do this.
Okay,
We
the
do
reference,
that.
that's very good. But know how she uses reference? engage seriously in textual criticism.
But they are the ones then who have made this great hermeneutical principle that we're going to use not the majority and not the oldest and not this and that, but just what the copies.
Yes, that is exactly right.
And then we should speak to how important it was, at least to the Jews, to be a copyist, to be a scribe. I mean, that was, at least as I remember learning about it, when they took their life in their hands by copying the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scripture.
Yes, but remember, that close copying only arose in the 3rd century AD. That is not true in BC times. Because you are talking about, for the Old Testament, when you are talking about stuff like counting the letters, finding the Lutheran, all right? All that was done by the Nazarenes, who operated 3rd to 6th and 8th to 9th centuries AD. AD. So the analogy here is, this is like somebody saying, what's the distance from this board to that table? And I go, 5, 10, 15, okay? About 17 and a half feet, all right? I've done this estimate, 17 and a half feet. Now, years later, people assiduously hand down the figure 17 and a half feet. You can hand that down all you want. Just remember this. You had centuries of people copying in a different way. Now, I'm going to end today by saying this. While this principle is in general the way to go, it's not the way I do text criticism in the Gospel of Mark. Instead, what I did was this. I took a look, reading through Mark a number of times. I took a look at what Mark's Greek usage and profile was. If I considered readings that were generally attested through a wide range of manuscripts. So I had to throw a bunch out. So in other words, I was able to establish what I consider to be a good profile of Mark's Greek usage. Step 1. Step 2. Which manuscript most closely adheres to that Greek usage? So in other words, if you say something like this, Mark likes to put his verbs at the end of the sentence, not in the middle. Okay? Well, are there some manuscripts that if there's a dispute where the verb goes, put the verb at the end? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. And this is why I came up with what I call preferred manuscripts, which I was operating with under the notion that these manuscripts basically adhere to the profile of Mark's Greek. Now, there's a whole bunch of people who don't agree with me on this, but they're wrong. Okay? This works incredibly well, and here's what you in fact find. What manuscript fits the profile the best? Manuscript B, which everybody thinks is the best because it has the readings that explain the rise of the other readings. Okay? But here's where the difference comes. Now, I have picked manuscripts that I think have the best congruence with the linguistic profile. And I prefer those when there's a dispute, as opposed to at each individual instance trying to figure out what's the more difficult reading. See, I have kind of default mode. My default mode is my preferred manuscripts. For other textual critics, they take every single case as a, what would you say, its own case. See? And they say, well, which is the more difficult reading? And I say, I don't know that we got to sync to that all the time, because here's my analogy. You have two people who are witnesses. One person tells the truth virtually all the time. The other one's kind of a liar. Well, you don't, if the two people are disagreeing, you don't at every point have to do an independent third-person investigation all the time. See, you have trustworthy kinds of manuscripts. But I want you to notice what I've done here. I'm not saying that they're trustworthy because they're old, or that they were written on vellum, or that they use capital letters, or that there were a whole bunch of them. I'm not saying that. That's kind of the old way to do it. I'm saying it's because they fit the Greek profile of the author. So, let's say you now hand me the Gospel of Luke, and you ask me to do text criticism. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to, in the first instance, look at the reading that explains the rise of the other readings. But I'm going to very quickly, if you ask me to study Luke, I'm going to do a whole work on the Greek profile of Luke. Then I'm going to see which manuscripts fit that the most. And I did that for the Gospel of John, and I've got an excellent profile of the Greek of the Gospel of John. So, what I'm going to need to do is see which manuscripts fit with that the most. Now, the fact of the matter is, B and Aleph tend to be your best manuscripts just from all kinds of points of view. So, you can kind of use that as default mode. Now, we've gone over time here. Next time, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to just give you a brief history of the fact that the readings in these manuscripts aren't just all over the shop. They kind of went in streams, and we can talk about that a little bit. This business of textual criticism is so important because, well, you saw that passage about not the Son, not knowing the time of the end. You have to make some real decisions on passages. And so I'll say this as the final statement, that people like to say something like this. Well, with textual criticism, no variant really makes any difference. Well, that's just not true. Now, there's no variant reading that puts a not in John 3:16. God did not so love the world. You know, there's nothing like that. But if you put in Matthew 24:36, that the Son does not know the time of the end, you've got some exegetical work to do. See? Whereas if you don't have it in there, it's a lot easier. So, I mean, that would be a really good example. I like to use that passage. It's certainly explicable, but you got work to do. And you can't say it makes no difference. You can't say it makes no difference. So the first thing you have to do when you are doing, like I'm doing the commentary, is I have to set my text. St. Augustine said, first thing you have to do when you interpret, you have to correct your manuscripts. All right? So I would say the first thing you have to do is you have to set your text. And you can't just believe the people in Munster who are dropping the Bible out of the sky.
The process that you outline, I think is a great process. Isn't that also the same process that we use to determine if an art painting, a classic, was really done by that artist? Because we look at his profile. Or with music, did this person really compose that music?
Yeah.
We look at their profile. So
that's right. Everybody, Marge, that's really good. Everybody is so committed, though, to the Lectio Difficilior, explaining the rise of other readings, as a general process. But see, I heard a lecture back in 1977 by a guy who convinced me that the problem was this is too atomistic. You know, if you just look at this one little thing, you got to see the whole way Mark or Matthew works. What's his, let's say, Greek profile like? But then you have to also look at his theology and stuff like that. Now, that takes a lot of work. Most people aren't willing to put that kind of time in. I mean, for example, I did this study on the Gospel of John. I actually counted every instance of the word "and," Kai, just to see where he was using it between sentences. I didn't count "and" like Peter and John, not like that, but "and" as a conjunction. A conjunction between clauses, not a conjunction between nouns. And you just gotta kind of bust your head on this. And to be honest with you, most people aren't willing to do that kind of work. But this is just, I'm typing up my manuscript now for Mark Volume 2. I'm still tinkering with some of this because there are a couple of critical decisions that you have to make. And it's really important. And it's all on the level, let's end where we started, of signifier. See, what signifiers am I reading? That's all we're asking about right here. We're not even talking about, reference or anything like that. Yeah.
Nothing that you have said in any of this denies the inspiration and the authority of the Scripture. In fact, I would argue that it supports that. Because God is at work, and the thoughts and minds, and He uses to put this all together. Our God is to figure it out. We're even more certain.
Well, I would put it like this. God always works through means. See, He always works through means. He became incarnate in His Son. Stuff happened with Jesus that you can't sort of explain. I mean, He's looking around saying, who touched me? Couldn't do miracles in His hometown. It's always stuff that looks like it's hell on wheels, And it's sort of that way with text criticism. But we get through this. This is not an impossible enterprise. And it has just given me a tremendous and deep appreciation for the work of Voelz. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot.